Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this. The world just witnessed a moment of pure political theater, and India was holding the stage. For years, the West, led by Washington, has tried to lecture India, bully India, even dictate terms to India. But this time, when Donald Trump tried to corner New Delhi, he was met not with hesitation, not with silence, but with a chilling, razor-sharp reply from India's Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar. A statement so calm, so precise, and yet so devastating that it sent shockwaves across Western capitals. This was not just a reply. This was India declaring loud and clear, we will not be pushed, we will not be dictated to, and we will stand tall on the world stage. For decades, the narrative was simple: the West sets the rules, and everyone else is expected to follow. But that era is over. What we saw in India's response was not just diplomacy. It was a masterclass in strength wrapped in composure. There was no shouting, no bluster, no theatrics, just a cold, precise statement that cut right through the noise. That's what true confidence looks like. You don't need to scream when you already know the power is on your side. And make no mistake, that moment showed the world that India no longer sees itself as a secondary player in global affairs. Think about it. This wasn't a response born out of insecurity or desperation. It was deliberate, measured, and devastating in its clarity. The West expected hesitation, maybe even compliance. Instead, they were confronted with a reality check: India doesn't bend to pressure anymore. The days of quietly nodding along are gone. Today, India speaks with its own voice, and the world listens, whether it wants to or not. What makes this so striking is the calmness of it all. Because when you're truly powerful, you don't have to flaunt it. That's exactly what happened here. The reply wasn't about theatrics, it was about authority. It was about sending a message not only to Trump, but to every Western leader watching: India is charting its own course, unapologetically. And it's not asking for permission. And the reaction proved the point. Shock across Western media, disbelief in Washington, a scramble to understand how the tables had turned so dramatically. But the truth is simple. The world underestimated India's resolve. They still think of India as the rising power of tomorrow. What they refuse to see is that tomorrow has already arrived. That statement, that moment, was a line in the sand. India is no longer just responding to the world, it is defining it. And that right there is what makes this reply so historic. Trump has always been a master of spectacle, a man who thrives on dominating the room and forcing others to play by his rules. He thought he could apply the same playbook to India: push hard, throw out bold statements, posture with bravado, and expect the other side to fold. But what he didn't anticipate was that the game had changed, and the India of today is not the India of yesterday. He miscalculated badly. The belief was simple: America could lean on India, and India would bend. After all, Washington has spent decades pulling strings in international politics, assuming that no nation outside its tight circle would dare to resist. But this time, the attempt to corner New Delhi didn't end in compliance. Instead, it ended in a stinging lesson: India does not respond to intimidation. When confronted, it responds with clarity, conviction, and steel. And that is exactly what happened. Trump's style relies heavily on creating uncertainty: loud threats, unpredictable statements, sudden shifts in tone. He expects his counterparts to flinch, to second-guess themselves, to concede something just to ease the pressure. Yet, when he tried that approach here, he ran into an immovable wall. The reply he got was calm, unshaken, and absolutely unwavering. No flinch, no compromise, just a steady assertion of national pride and independence. For a man like Trump, who feeds on dominating the exchange, that silence-breaking reply must have been like ice water thrown over his bravado. And the ripple effects were immediate. The West suddenly realized that the old tactics wouldn't work anymore. You can't cajole or bully a country that has already decided it will stand firm on its own principles. Trump underestimated India's confidence, and in doing so, he handed them a golden opportunity to showcase it to the world. This miscalculation wasn't just about one man underestimating another. It was about an entire mindset in the West that still clings to the illusion of control. That illusion shattered in an instant. The moment India stood its ground, it wasn't Trump holding the stage anymore, it was India. And that shift left the world stunned. Power has a strange way of shifting. It rarely happens overnight, but there comes a moment when the world realizes that the old balance no longer holds. That moment has arrived. What we are seeing now is not just India pushing back against a single statement, but India stepping into a role it has quietly prepared for over years. No longer a follower of global trends, but a leader shaping them. The reply wasn't just about defending dignity, it was a declaration the global order is no longer one-way traffic from west to east. This is the part that rattled so many Western capitals. They are used to dictating, to expecting compliance, to assuming the rest of the world will adapt to their framework. But here stood India, unshaken, unbothered, and unwilling to play the junior partner. It was a reminder that the world's largest democracy, backed by its economic rise, military strength, and global influence, has the authority to speak on equal terms. That balance of power has shifted, not in theory but in practice, right in front of our eyes. Consider what this means for the future. Every word from that reply carried the weight of confidence, the kind that comes from a nation that knows its time has come. The West may still see itself as the axis of decision-making, but the reality is far more complex. Nations like India are no longer waiting to be invited to the table. They are bringing their own table. And once you've done that, there's no going back. The shock wasn't just that the reply was firm, it was that it was delivered so effortlessly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That is how real power works. You don't have to scream it, you don't have to dress it up in theatrics. You simply state it, and the room shifts. That is what happened here. The message was unmistakable. The world is multipolar now, and India has stepped into its rightful place at the center of it. There was something far deeper in that reply than just a diplomatic rebuttal. It carried the unmistakable weight of national pride, the kind that resonates far beyond political chambers or media headlines. It wasn't just words directed at an American president. It was a message to every single citizen back home, and to millions watching abroad, that their country would never bow, never apologize for its strength, and never compromise its sovereignty. That is what made the statement so powerful. It wasn't crafted for applause in Washington or Brussels. It was delivered with India in mind. For decades, many Indians have grown up hearing the same refrain from the West. Lectures about democracy, warnings about policy, subtle suggestions about how they should run their affairs. And for decades, there has been a quiet sense of frustration that those voices drowned out India's own. But that moment flipped the script. Suddenly, the words coming out of New Delhi weren't defensive, they weren't accommodating, they were assertive, unapologetic, and brimming with pride. It was as though the foreign minister's voice carried the heartbeat of 1 billion people, telling the world enough is enough. That's why the reaction back home was so visceral. It wasn't just about politics, it was about identity. It was about a country finally seeing its leaders reflect the same confidence, the same steel that ordinary Indians have long felt in their bones. And the pride that surged from that was palpable. For many, it was a defining reminder that their nation is no longer in anyone's shadow. It stands tall on its own, shoulder to shoulder with the so-called great powers. What made it all the more remarkable was the calm delivery. No need for shouting or theatrics, just clarity, because real pride doesn't need to be loud, it needs only to be true. And in that moment it was. That reply became more than a diplomatic exchange, it became a mirror, reflecting back to Indians their own rising stature in the world. That is why it struck such a chord. It wasn't just about policy, it was about pride, dignity, and the unshakable belief in who they are. The reverberations of that reply were felt far beyond the room in which it was delivered. It wasn't just a diplomatic statement, it was a global jolt, the kind of shockwave that ripples through power corridors in Washington, London, and Brussels. Overnight, the usual calculus was thrown into disarray. For years, the West operated on the assumption that India would eventually align itself, that it could be persuaded or pressured into falling in line with existing power structures. What they saw instead was a defiance so composed, so cutting, that it forced them to reassess everything they thought they knew. The shock wasn't simply in the words, it was in the tone. Calm, measured, almost surgical in its precision. There was no aggression, no insult, no theatrics. And yet, the message landed like a thunderclap: India does not take orders. That, more than anything else, unsettled Western capitals. Because if one of the fastest growing economies, one of the largest democracies, and one of the most influential voices in global affairs openly asserts its independence, it sets a precedent. Others watch. Others take notes. Others begin to realize they too can chart their own path. That is the true scale of the shockwave. It wasn't about embarrassing a single leader. It was about shifting the mindset of an entire international community. The idea that the West can dictate terms suddenly felt outdated, even laughable. And that realization spreads quickly. Headlines carried it, commentators dissected it, and governments quietly panicked over what it meant for their influence. At the heart of it, this was more than just India's defiance. It was a reminder that the world is changing faster than many in the West are willing to admit. The balance of power is tilting, not through wars or revolutions, but through quiet, devastatingly clear words. And when those words come from a nation like India, the impact is seismic. The shockwave isn't temporary. It lingers, reshaping conversations, policies, and expectations. That is why this reply will be remembered not just for what was said, but for how deeply it unsettled those who heard it. And so, here we are. A world that believed it could still lecture, pressure, and corner India has been left stunned. One reply, delivered with icy composure, has rewritten the rules of engagement. No shouting, no drama, just clarity and conviction that sent shockwaves across continents. That's how power truly speaks. This was never just about Trump or any single Western leader. This was about a nation standing tall, declaring with absolute certainty that its sovereignty is not up for negotiation. For too long, India was seen as the future, always tomorrow's story. But that illusion has been shattered. The future isn't tomorrow. It's here, now. What we witnessed wasn't merely diplomacy. It was history unfolding in real time. A shift in the balance of global power, a surge of national pride, and a cold reminder to the West that the world is no longer theirs to dictate. India will chart its own course, set its own terms, and the world will have no choice but to listen. So let the record show the chilling statement wasn't just a reply, it was a declaration. The age of being told what to do is over. The age of India standing tall, unflinching, unapologetic, that age has begun. And whether the West likes it or not, they will have to accept one simple truth: the world has changed, and India is now at the very heart of it.